Meghan expected the envelope. She had been told to watch for it, had quietly prepared for what her return might symbolize, and understood that one appearance inside the palace gardens could alter the story of her royal exile. But the invitation never crossed the Atlantic. Instead, a brief message arrived, confirming that Catherine had personally blocked her attendance at the annual royal garden party, and the reason behind that decision was far more personal than anyone surrounding the monarchy was prepared to admit. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Meghan read the message twice before lowering her phone. The Royal Garden Party, an annual gathering where the monarch welcomes people honored for public service, was never just another invitation. Attendance signaled acceptance and trust. That was why the missing envelope cut so deeply. In California, she rose so quickly that a cup shifted against its saucer. "She stopped it herself?" she asked, and Harry's silence made the humiliation sharper. Catherine had already made the decision. At Kensington Palace, she placed the amended guest list before an aide and kept her voice level. The Princess of Wales had reviewed the final names and ordered Meghan's proposed invitation removed before it could be issued. She insisted the gathering could not become a stage for unresolved family conflict. Yet her fingers tightened around the folder, showing this was deliberate. She understood the storm that line could unleash. The closed file held a second threat. Days earlier, Catherine had received a documented private communication outlining how Meghan's appearance might reopen negotiations over royal status, security, and public recognition. The message did not read like a simple request to attend. It read like the beginning of a campaign. That distinction hardened her resolve, because the future queen believed the invited volunteers would disappear beneath headlines about a Sussex return. Charles learned of the exclusion only after the list had been finalized. The king studied the page, set it down, and asked why he had not been consulted before the change became official. No one answered quickly. His concern was not only Meghan's absence, it was Catherine's growing authority to define who could enter the monarchy's inner circle. Across the ocean, Meghan felt that shift as rejection. Inside the palace, Catherine regarded it as protection. Neither woman had spoken directly, but the confrontation had begun, and neither could retreat. One wanted acknowledgement, the other demanded boundaries. And to understand why one crossed-out invitation carried the force of a royal decree, the private wounds Catherine and Meghan brought into that moment must first be exposed. This was never truly about flowers, handshakes, or a summer afternoon behind palace gates. For Catherine, the guest list represented protection of her family, her role, and a monarchy she had spent years learning to defend without complaint. For Meghan, the missing invitation became proof that the institution had not merely allowed her departure, but had emotionally sealed the doors behind her. Between them stood years of silence, competing memories, and one question neither woman could escape: who had wounded whom first? Catherine had become far more than a familiar face at ceremonial events. The future queen now played a central role in planning occasions tied to public confidence, family unity, and the next generation of the crown. A royal garden party, a formal gathering held to honor people for public service, carried enormous symbolic weight. She knew one appearance could dominate every headline and bury the very guests the event was meant to celebrate. Meghan had seen the same occasion differently. She had not expected a speech, an official role, or a sudden return to royal duty. She had imagined something smaller, one afternoon of public acknowledgement, one sign that departure had not become permanent exile. When she told Harry she had expected basic courtesy rather than warmth, he said nothing. His silence wounded her more than the rejection. She understood then that he had doubted the invitation from the beginning, but had chosen not to prepare her. Catherine carried her own fear into a private conversation with William after their children had left the room. She admitted that Meghan's presence could turn an event honoring community service into another media battle over the Sussexes. She did not sound victorious. She sounded tired, protective, and deeply aware that every decision would be judged as either weakness or cruelty. William listened without interrupting. The prince understood the danger immediately, because a public appearance would be treated as a royal endorsement whether the palace intended it or not. Catherine asked whether she had gone too far. He paused, moved the guest folder toward himself, then pushed it back without opening it. "No," he said. "You drew the line we should have drawn earlier." Harry remained divided. He understood why Catherine feared the consequences, yet he could not ignore how much influence she now held. She had blocked Meghan without speaking to either of them directly, and William's support transformed one woman's judgment into the united position of the future king and queen. Meghan felt the old memories returning. One moment, above all others, rose from the silence. That earlier line had first been crossed at a private memorial gathering, where one conversation changed Catherine's view of Meghan permanently. Every royal rupture has a moment that appears small until history circles back to it. In this story, that moment came during a private family gathering after a memorial service, when the cameras were gone and the carefully rehearsed expressions had finally fallen away. Catherine and Meghan stood alone, beside a closed drawing room door, speaking in voices low enough that no aide could hear. What began as an attempt at civility ended with a warning, and from that evening forward, Catherine no longer believed Meghan wanted reconciliation without conditions. Catherine had maintained the uneasy truce throughout the gathering. She walked beside Meghan enough to suggest unity, answered with politeness, and gave no sign of distrust. Meghan matched that restraint, but the silence between them carried more weight than any exchange. The memorial service, a ceremony held to honor someone who had died, demanded dignity. Both women understood that one visible fracture could overwhelm the purpose of the day. Meghan waited until the family began dispersing. She asked Catherine to support a future joint appearance that would publicly restore her standing without requiring a return to full royal duties. To her, it was a limited gesture, proof that reconciliation remained possible. To the princess, it felt like pressure. Catherine believed her credibility was being requested before private trust had been repaired, and that any shared appearance would be treated as official forgiveness. Meghan heard judgment in the hesitation. She insisted she was not asking permission to exist, and accused Catherine of treating her as a permanent threat rather than a relative searching for a path back. The words landed sharply. Catherine answered that no public platform could come before private conduct matched public appeals for peace. Meghan's expression changed. "Who has been speaking against me?" she asked, certain the resistance extended beyond one woman. Catherine refused to name anyone. She said that loyalty could not be demanded through appearances. Meghan reached for the drawing room handle, but Catherine spoke before the door opened. "This cannot begin in public," she says. Meghan turned slowly, her face composed but wounded. "Then perhaps you never intend to let it begin at all." The door closes between them. Before leaving, Meghan warned that Catherine might one day discover how isolating palace loyalty could become. The princess remembered the remark not as sympathy, but as a veiled prediction. Months later, when Meghan's name appeared on the proposed garden party list, that conversation returned instantly. Catherine saw the same strategy unfolding again. Public acceptance first, private repair later. Months later, that unresolved exchange would return with full force, when Meghan demanded an explanation, and Catherine finally agreed to speak without aides, courtiers, or carefully prepared statements. The call lasted less than 15 minutes, but it carried the anger of several silent years. There were no advisors shaping the language, no palace secretaries interrupting, and no husbands speaking on behalf of either woman. Meghan wanted Catherine to admit that the exclusion was personal. Catherine wanted Meghan to acknowledge that appearances had repeatedly been used to force conversations the family was not ready to have. Neither raised her voice at first. Then one sentence stripped away the final layer of royal politeness. Meghan had requested the private call as soon as confirmation arrived that Catherine had removed her name. The princess accepted, because silence now carried its own danger. She believed another unanswered message would deepen the wound and turn a family dispute into something even harder to contain. The royal garden party, an event honoring people for public service, could not become a symbolic Sussex return, surrounded by arguments over titles, security, and reconciliation. Meghan rejected that reasoning. She asked when Catherine had become the person entitled to decide who belonged inside royal spaces. Beneath the question sat a deeper humiliation. She was not merely absent from one event, but excluded by someone she once believed stood beside her in the same difficult institution. Catherine answered that responsibility had found her when every family appearance began affecting her children, her marriage, and the stability of the monarchy they would inherit. The accusation came quickly. Meghan said Catherine wanted the public to see one woman as dutiful and the other as destructive. For a moment, the future queen lost her composure. She did not shout, but her silence sharpened. Then she answered, "I did not create the distance, Meghan. I stopped pretending it was not there." The words made the decision unmistakable. This was no administrative mistake and no temporary pause. It was a boundary drawn with full knowledge of the pain it would cause both women from that moment. For several seconds, neither woman speaks. Meghan's breathing is audible across the line. Catherine looks toward the closed door, knowing William is waiting outside, but refusing to summon him. She then says quietly, "The invitation will not be restored." Meghan absorbed the finality, then delivered the warning that pulled the dispute toward the throne. She said Charles should decide who was excluded from royal occasions, not the woman preparing to inherit influence from him. Catherine heard the challenge beneath the sentence and knew the king could no longer remain outside the conflict. With reconciliation collapsing in real time, the conflict moved beyond two wounded women and into the hands of the man whose authority Catherine appeared to have exercised before he could intervene. Charles had spent his life waiting to possess the authority of the crown, yet the missing invitation forced him to confront a more uncomfortable truth. Power was already moving toward the next reign. Catherine had acted without seeking his personal approval, William had supported her, and the machinery around them had accepted the decision almost instantly. When the final guest list was placed before the king, Meghan's absence was not marked as a request. It appeared as a settled fact, and Charles understood exactly what that meant. Charles received the finalized names during a morning briefing, and noticed the omission immediately. An earlier discussion had considered a controlled gesture of goodwill toward Meghan, yet her name had vanished before his view was formally recorded. The royal garden party remained an event held in the monarch's name, but practical control over invitations could be delegated to senior working royals and palace planning teams. That arrangement had now become something more powerful than routine administration. The king set down his reading glasses and asked why Catherine's objection had reached the final list before his own position was clear. His voice remained calm, but the question carried restrained hurt. He was not only defending Meghan, he was confronting the possibility that others already trusted the judgment of the next reign more than the hesitation of the present one. William met his father privately and refused to retreat. The prince explained that Catherine had acted to prevent predictable disruption, not to challenge the crown. Palace staff had received a proposed media strategy suggesting that Meghan's attendance could be framed as an official restoration of royal status. Senior courtiers feared one appearance would consume the event, leaving charity workers and community guests invisible during a day intended to honor their service. Charles understood the argument, and that understanding made the moment harder. He studied the blank space where Meghan's name had appeared in an earlier draft, pressed one finger against the page, and looked at William. "You should have come to me." The prince did not retreat. And if we had, would the answer truly have been different? Silence followed. The monarch could overrule Catherine, but doing so would expose division, weaken William, and turn the garden party into the very spectacle everyone feared. He chose not to restore the invitation. In that decision, personal concerns surrendered to institutional survival, and Catherine's judgment became the crown's position. What began as Catherine's boundary had become a royal judgment, carrying consequences no apology could easily undo. The king's silence answered more than any decree could, and when that silence reached California, Meghan understood that the door had not been closed by Catherine alone. Meghan could have fought Catherine's decision as a personal insult. What broke through her anger was the discovery that Charles would not reverse it. The exclusion had now passed through every level that mattered. Catherine had initiated it, William had defended it, palace officials had enacted it, and the king had allowed it to stand. In California, Meghan stopped speaking about the garden party as a missed event. She began describing it as a verdict. Harry, caught between fury and resignation, knew she was not entirely wrong. Harry received the final confirmation without ceremony. No revised invitation would be issued, and the palace considered the guest list closed. The practical consequences followed at once. Travel discussions ended. Wardrobe preparations stopped. Security inquiries were withdrawn. What had begun as a symbolic rejection became painfully real, because every cancelled arrangement proved that the decision was no longer open to debate. Meghan turned to Harry with the question he had feared. Had he warned his family that her attendance would create difficulties? He hesitated, and that pause cut deeper than any answer. She understood that he had expected resistance. Harry admitted he believed William would oppose the visit, but he had never imagined Catherine would take direct responsibility for blocking it. The confession left both of them exposed. She felt betrayed by his silence, while he felt trapped between loyalty to his wife and knowledge of his family's fears. Meghan opened her laptop and began drafting a public statement, accusing the palace of preaching unity while enforcing exclusion. The language was sharp, controlled, and devastating. Yet even as she wrote, she understood the danger. Releasing it could confirm Catherine's belief that every private wound would become a public battle. Meghan places the unfinished statement on a table and slides the laptop toward Harry. "Read it," she says. He reads every line, closes the screen, and answers, "Publishing this will make the invitation the least important thing we lose." She turns away, wounded by the warning but unable to dismiss it. Harry did not ask her to forgive Catherine. He asked for one chance to speak to her, without communications teams, formal demands, or prepared language. That request changed the direction of the conflict. Instead of another public strike, he chose a private risk. He contacted his sister-in-law directly, opening the first unguarded exchange between them since the family's divisions had become impossible to hide. Meghan gave no blessing, but her silence allowed him to place the call neither could avoid. That night, Harry reached out not as a prince negotiating access, but as a brother, asking Catherine whether the family had finally decided there was no road back. There were no private secretaries on the line, and no statement waiting to be approved. Harry called Catherine after midnight in Britain, when the palace corridors were quiet and neither of them could hide behind ceremony. He did not begin by defending Meghan. He began by asking whether his children would one day be excluded from royal life because of decisions made by their parents. The question changed the conversation immediately, forcing Catherine to separate the woman she distrusted from the family she did not wish to erase. Harry asked for honesty, not reconsideration. He promised the conversation would remain between them, untouched by advisors, publicists, or palace briefings. Catherine accepted that condition because she knew another formal exchange would only repeat the language that had already failed them. Blocking one high-profile appearance, she explained, was a boundary around a public event. It was not a declaration that every family connection had been severed forever. Harry struggled to accept the distinction. Each closed invitation felt like evidence that Archie and Lilibet might one day know their relatives only through photographs, old recordings, and hostile headlines. The fear had followed him quietly for years, but now his voice broke under its weight. He was no longer arguing about access. He was asking whether his children would inherit a punishment they had never earned. Catherine heard the pain and answered with her own. George, Charlotte, and Louis had also felt the consequences, she confessed. They heard familiar names mentioned in lowered voices and could not understand why people described as family remained absent. The princess had tried to protect them from adult bitterness, yet every silence created another question. That cost, she admitted, had become impossible to ignore. Catherine sits alone beside a darkened window as Harry's voice breaks. She closes her eyes and allows the silence to remain. Then she says, "Your children are not responsible for any of this." It is not an apology, but it becomes the first sentence in years that Harry believes might lead somewhere other than another public battle. Harry asked the question that mattered most. Could Meghan ever return to a royal event? Catherine said yes, but only after private trust was rebuilt without publicity, negotiation, or symbolic demands. She proposed a family meeting away from official occasions, with no photographers, announcements, or promise of immediate restoration. Harry returned to Meghan carrying an offer more difficult than the garden party itself: reconciliation without an audience, and hope without guaranteed recognition. It promised no victory. The invitation remained blocked, yet the conflict had unexpectedly opened a smaller, quieter door. One Meghan now had to decide whether pride would allow her to enter. By the morning of the garden party, the missing guest had become more discussed than many of those attending. Newspapers framed the exclusion as a royal power shift, broadcasters dissected Catherine's authority, and crowds outside Buckingham Palace searched every arriving vehicle for a face they already knew would not appear. Yet behind the noise, the event unfolded with deliberate calm. Catherine stepped into the garden smiling, while thousands of miles away Meghan watched a brief television clip in silence, confronting the image of a royal world continuing without her. Catherine understood that every expression would be judged. A smile could be called triumph, a pause could be called fear, and a careful answer could be twisted into cruelty. The Royal Garden Party, an event held to honor volunteers, charity workers, and community leaders, had become a test of her growing influence. Palace officials refused to discuss individual invitations and kept directing attention back to the people whose service had earned them a place inside the gates. The media refused to let the story go. One London newspaper placed Catherine's photograph across its front page beneath the headline, "The New Gatekeeper." The phrase turned a disputed guest list into a national argument over succession, authority, and who now controlled access to the monarchy's inner world. Broadcasters debated whether the princess had protected the institution or hardened its divisions, while international outlets treated Meghan's absence as proof that the next reign had already begun drawing its boundaries. Outside Buckingham Palace, one public moment cut through the noise. A woman holding flowers told a live broadcaster, "A garden party should honor service, not settle family scores." Her words spread quickly, because they challenged everyone at once: the palace, the press, and those who had allowed one missing guest to eclipse thousands of invited citizens. Meghan watched the coverage beside Harry in California. The television showed Catherine laughing with an elderly charity volunteer as cameras flashed beyond the ropes. Meghan reached for the remote, paused, and lowered her hand. "I wanted one afternoon," she said. Harry answered, "Then perhaps we have to begin somewhere no one can see." She admitted that she had wanted to prove she could enter that space without creating chaos. The decision came quietly. Meghan deleted the public statement she had prepared and told Harry she would consider Catherine's offer of a private meeting. It was not surrender, it was a refusal to let the spectacle decide what happened next, and the headlines finally began fading. The world believed the garden party had produced a winner and a loser, but the true verdict would be decided by what each woman chose after the crowds disappeared.